Welcome to Unite Now, where we bring unity to you, wherever you are.
Welcome to Empowering Storytellers with Real-Time Technology. My name is Megan O'Connor, and I'm a senior instructional designer with Unity Technologies.
And my name is Vlad Neykov, and I work in the R&D graphics department at Unity. So we'd like to talk to you a little bit about storytelling. And storytelling has been present with us since we drew, on the walls of caves back in prehistoric times. But it is changing now, isn't it, Megan?
Yes, the landscape of storytelling is changing. In fact, the whole world is changing. Obviously, the world looks a lot different right now than it did in 2019, and in ways we could have never imagined. But there are a lot of things happening in the world that are changing storytelling. There's big demographic shifts happening. For example, in 2019, millennials outnumbered baby boomers for the first time in the United States. If you look at globally demographics in India, for example, more than half of the population of 1.3 billion people are under the age of 25, and more than 500 million Indians use the internet today.
That's a lot of people.
It is a lot of people.
So it's interesting because we planned this talk for a while and we always thought it was relevant, but the way things are right now, it is even more so relevant.
That's exactly right. And the landscape of storytelling is changing because the medium of storytelling is changing. For example, saturation of mobile phones globally was expected to surpass 67% of the world population in 2019. It's probably more now. And the global population over the last 10 years has started consuming stories differently. So if you think about YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, binge watching, IP franchises, TikTok, Instagram.
There's a lot
There's
of
so
choices.
many.
Yeah,
That's right. People are consuming stories in a different way, and now that people are stuck at home, they're consuming them probably even more. Audiences are also spending a considerable amount of time on their phones playing games, obviously streaming different kinds of content. Meanwhile, game technology is becoming more accessible and graphics technology is improving all of the time. And so games look like movies these days, and people spend a lot of time playing games.
it's interesting that also the type of people playing games has really changed since I, had my first go at a little arcade game back in high school. My parents even play some games. If you can convince them that this is about the story, about the experience, it's very accessible.
That's right. That's right. And there are a ton of women gamers as well. So the landscape of storytelling is changing not only because of the audience, because of the medium, but also because the storyteller is changing.
Mm-hmm.
And game makers have become storytellers. Mobile gamers are known to spend an hour or more a day playing their favorite mobile games. I spend a ton of time on my phone, not playing games, I'll admit, but a lot of people are playing games on their phones. And I think the film and television industry really is looking at that, and they're looking at the fact that console gamers have been known to spend 100 plus hours of time playing their favorite open world games. They're looking at that and they want to access that level of engagement, and interactive storytelling is on the rise. Like, I don't know, Vlad, if you've seen Netflix Bandersnatch, but that's a good example. Or there's another short film called Hulu's Door Number One, which is a choose your own adventure type of thing that features Snoop Dogg. Pretty cool.
That is, it's funny. Like I grew up with the Choose Your Own Adventure books, and I remember when Bandersnatch came out, my girlfriend and I were basically replaying it. Like we just wanted to try every single possible option, see how it will end.
Yeah, so you end up watching the thing over and over and over again. And I think too, even with games, my husband and I have been debating going back and playing Red Dead Redemption again. But it's like a 60-hour plus time commitment to try to change the narrative.
Now's the time to do it, if ever there was one.
That's true. So real-time technology born from games is also powering new methods of producing content more faster and more flexibly, which is something we're going to talk about in a bit.
So all these changes, they represent a new opportunity from anybody creating content.
That's right. They mean it's a huge opportunity. There's a huge demand for content right now. They need to have ways to produce content quickly. They need to have ways to produce content from home. So there's been a renewed interest in animation technology, for example, because people can do animation from home. And I think there's also a desire for new stories with a fresh perspective, to reach new culturally diverse audiences, to give voice to people who may not have been heard before.
Yeah, and sort of at the heart of all that change, this is a real opportunity for real-time technology.
That's right. I think you got it completely right. This is a huge opportunity for storytellers, and at the heart of that is real-time technology.
Well, if anybody's not familiar with real-time technology, I guess this question will pop up in their minds right now.
What does that mean? What is that?
So what is it, Megan?
Okay, so real-time technology, where you may have encountered real-time technology before, perhaps you have played this game called Angry Birds on your phone. That's a very popular game that many people have played. That is powered by Unity, and that's an example of real-time technology. Here's another one. Probably a lot of people have played Pokemon Go. This is another example of real-time. Have you, Vlad? I'm sure you're a big Pokemon
Actually,
Go
I'm
fan.
not. I don't know what gave it away. But funny enough, when friends and family were asking me where I work, this game allowed me to say, like, Pokemon Go? Like, yeah, I'm like, I don't work for them, but I work for the company that made the engine with which it was made.
Right, exactly. And then, so maybe you're not familiar with mobile games. Here's another example of a game that was created with real-time technology. This is a game called Subnautica. I know you're familiar with this one, Vlad.
Yeah, I have spent countless hours. Actually, played it in VR, which, when we discussed in the beginning, that the medium of storytelling is changing. I have friends who've played this just on their PC, and that's one kind of experience. But I have been there. Like, I had my helmet on for a good 60 hours, and I was physically in that ocean, and it was one of the most beautiful and terrifying experiences I've had playing games.
Right. I actually haven't played this yet, but I want to. So, for those of you who haven't played Subnautica before or don't know what it is, it's an open world action game in which you explore the open ocean of an alien planet. And it's surpassed 5 million copies sold and averages 27 to 45 hours of gameplay. And people obviously love it. And I think, this is also sort of like another really popular game, which is Beat Saber, which we've been
Yeah,
playing to get some exercise in these days while we're stuck in
that
our
is true.
in our homes. So, but this type of world, Subnautica world, is an open world type of. So you can just go anywhere. Everything renders in front of you. Wherever you turn to your left, you turn to your right, you're seeing things instantly. There's no rendering time. And that's always amazed me, that you can just go into these spaces and run around, and it feels endless. Sometimes it feels like you're not inhibited or restricted to certain things. You can just keep going, and that's amazed me, and that is the power of real-time technology.
Yeah. And of course, you do run into some walls. For example, it's time for lunch, and you probably should stop playing real time,
That's
open-ended
true.
games. Yeah.
That's true. Or
But you can do a
you're
lot of other things, right?
Yeah,
Like, it's not just
exactly.
for games.
That's true. Real-time technology can do a lot more than just create games. And I think that's the whole point of our talk, that people are
Mhm.
starting to think about how they can use this technology for other things. And so here are some examples. You can use it for pre-visualization, for look development, for environment creation, for set or scene layout, for blocking or animatics, for prototyping. This is really relevant right now for creators who are stuck at home and can't go into their studios, and they want to like create something. They can start working with Unity and do all of these things.
I believe we have some examples with one of the projects we've done internally.
Yeah, so we're going to show this animation in just a minute, but this is an example of from an animation called Sherman. And so I think I want to explain how powerful Unity can be for the process of animation. So here is a picture of Sherman. Sherman's the bird, and this raccoon. And
Was
what
a
you're seeing,
spoiler.
I know. And so I'm full of spoilers. I don't know how that works. So here are some examples of Sherman in different states, and also the raccoon in different states. You can see that the raccoon in the first image has no fur, and then as we go along to the other side, there's a very furry raccoon. So one thing that's interesting about Unity is, and the fact that you can run in real-time technology, is that you don't have to wait for things to render. So that means that you can be animating a character, for example, a hairless raccoon, and you can really do a lot of animation on your hairless raccoon. And meanwhile, the lighting person can be changing the light, altering the animator could be altering the light. And then you could decide, okay, now we just need to swap in our furry raccoon or our green bird for our yellow bird. And you just do it like instantly, no re-rendering.
This is probably the point where we should mention that no raccoons, be it hairless or furry, were harmed in the making of this presentation.
That's right. So, but there's more. So I mentioned animation, photogrammetry, lighting, visual effects, editing and sequencing, and compositing.
So I know you like lists, and that's really just scratches the tip of the iceberg. At the end of the day, real-time technology is a tool, but it is a tool that can be applied to a variety of industries, projects, and stories. And next, we're going to show you the short animation of Sherman. All right, and that was Sherman. And looks like there's another list here.
Yes, I know. I am full of lists. Okay, so other things that you can do with Unity. So virtual reality, we mentioned Beat Saber. You meant Subnautica, which you played in VR, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and virtual production, all things that are possible with real-time technology from Unity.
And I believe we have some more examples.
Exactly. So this is actually Crow the Legend. It's an award-winning VR animation from Baobab Studios featuring Oprah, John Legend, Constance Wu, people we've heard of, among many others. This is an excellent example of innovative interactive storytelling in VR, created in real time for Oculus, Oculus Go, and the Samsung Gear VR.
So lots of VRs.
Yes, and it's actually a really beautiful story. And it's really, you could sit your kids in VR and have them watch this little film, and it's beautiful.
And nothing jumps at you.
No, it's a pretty nice story. And there's another image of the bird. So I'm always thinking as an instructional designer about students. And, I think that Unity is a really powerful tool for students to learn right now. Not only students who are interested in animation or film, but students who are interested in making sure that they have a lot of career options in the future, right? Because Unity is used across industries in media and entertainment, in architecture, engineering, and construction, in auto, transportation, and manufacturing. So if you learn Unity and you learn to use real-time technology, you're really setting yourself up well for a whole bunch of careers in different fields.
Yeah, it's probably important to really stress the point that even though a lot of real-time engines, are called game engines, or at least that's the origin, the applications really go way beyond gaming. So, for example, we have a car here, and of course, many car commercials already has shown, featured rendered cars. But the cool thing is that this is actually running real-time in Unity. So at any point, you can change the color of the car, the lighting, the reflections. And this is something that instantaneously get updated. You don't have to send it to a render farm and wait hours or days to get back the final result.
I know that I think probably the first time I saw this, I just thought it was a picture of a car. I don't spend that much time looking at cars. So I think I was definitely convinced this was actually a car. And then I was surprised to learn it's a CG car, right? And then I was even more surprised to learn that you could change the reflections on it and it would all render immediately.
One little, I guess, trick I learned through the years to spot when something is CG. If it's just too clean, I mean, anybody who's had a car, if you try to keep it this clean,
Right. Although I'm sure that in car advertisements, right, it's always...
That is true. I guess just my cars were never that clean.
Your cars are, there we go. Okay, and the nice thing about Unity is that it can be used with very small teams or very large teams, and there's different kinds of tools for working, collaborating in different ways.
I feel like I want to mention when I said my cars, I meant the cars I've had throughout my life, not that I have many cars right now.
Oh, you have 10
it's a great
cars.
industry to be in, but
you have 10 cars at home. I know.
10 cars, they're all bright clean. They're all rendered in real time. So I believe we have an example for a smaller team.
This is Mr. Carton. This is actually one of the first animation series that was created in Unity. So let's watch this video. It's really cute. Before you start it though, Vlad, I just want to say, so I think one thing that's really incredible about this is the fact that it uses photogrammetry, these textures that look like cardboard, to make it look really real. So it takes it out of that sort of CG kind of game space and makes it feel like more like stop motion, and it looks like stop motion, but it was created in Unity. So let's check it out.
Ooh la la! Oh. Ah. Ooh la la.
We're back.
Yeah. So real time 3D is powerful. Hope we've convinced you of that.
And let's maybe explain why. So you don't have to be already using any 3D rendering or be very much on the tech side. We're going to go over a very high level overview. So basically just a bird's eye view on how this technology is possible and what enables it. So to talk about real-time 3D, we should maybe discuss first quickly offline rendering. I'll just mention it. So the rendering technique that many people are familiar with who have been using any 3D software is just traditional offline rendering where you create your scene in your authoring tool, and then you press a render button, then all the materials, all the lights, everything gets calculated, and then you get that final realistic looking image, as you can see here on the right in 3D Studio Max. So then what is real-time rendering? So you still have to do the rendering bit, but to be real-time, you have to do it a lot of times. And you have to do it a lot of times per second. So hopefully this frames the challenge that real-time engines like Unity are trying to solve. So we're talking about FPS, frame per second. A lot of gamers among you already know the term. And if your FPS is too low, your game basically is not great, and it looks very choppy. The FPS you might be looking at really will depend on what you're targeting. Traditionally, we know film that you see in the movie theaters, back when we used to all go into movie theaters, is aiming at 24 frames a second. Mobile games usually are running for about 30 frames a second. If you're looking at console or PC games, usually 30 to 60, with 60 becoming more and more the norm, especially if you do any shooter games or anything that's really fast-paced. Then Beat Saber, we discussed before, but you really want to have about 90 frames a second for VR games. Otherwise, you might get a bit of what they call VR sickness or that motion sickness. Have you ever experienced that, Megan?
I think I've tried some things where it definitely was not quite right, and you get out of those experiences pretty quickly.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing because the body basically is sort of fooled that that you are in a different reality, in a virtual reality, but then you don't sense things with your body that usually you would, like when you're really close to a surface or when there's supposed to be wind coming because you're moving really fast. And at that point, your body basically says, "I think I might have been poisoned. Let's get sick right now."
Right.
So you really want to avoid that with your users.
Yes.
So moving on. Interesting, in the very opposite spectrum of this, in some industries, even if you could get 1 frame per second, even if you can just get instantaneous results of your rendering, that is also considered a big win. So depending on what you're targeting, frames per second might be a very different goal for you, or even a moving goal. But the challenge here is presented that you have to really hit that frame per second to get a believable experience for your audience.
So Vlad, I just want to say, I think, as someone who has spent a lot of time waiting for things to render, sometimes you make something, you have to wait for it to render. It takes an hour. You go away, you come back, and something's not right. Like one little tiny thing that you missed is not right, and then you have to redo the render. And sometimes renders can take like an hour, or sometimes they can take days, and it's very frustrating when you're on a deadline and it doesn't look right and you have to redo it. So is that process completely eliminated with Unity?
I mean, basically, yes. And there's sure going to be things that anybody has to revisit, but the iteration time of just going and changing a color and instantaneously changes in your scene, or moving an object a bit to the left. I'm not from the film industry, but I believe I've heard the expression "we'll fix that in post" as sort of a little funny thing that you can say, but also kind of true. That doesn't really exist with real time because you don't have to wait to post. There is no post. You fix it now and it updates automatically.
Right. Very cool.
So clearly this is a big challenge. So the question might be then, well, how do engines work? How is all of this possible? So here is a screenshot of Unity. And we're not going to go into any particulars how to use Unity. I believe on the second part of this talk, Megan has a lot of resources that can get you started. A lot of free learning resources also available. So we're just going to go with a very quick overview. Unity is a program. You open it, and you basically import assets in it. So over here in our project window, we can put different kind of assets. Things like 3D models, materials, textures, animations, and even more things, sounds, effects, etc. So in this case, we have the model of Ellen, who is one of the characters created by our content team. And really right now, Unity says, okay, there's a model here, but you're not telling me how to render it. How is it supposed to look? So then we can assign a material to Ellen. And at this point, Unity goes like, okay, I can see we have some lights in the scene, and now I know how this model should look when it's lit. Then we can add textures. And this, of course, gives you like the colors, and there's more advanced types of textures that can change the way the surface looks, etc. And then we can add animations to our model. So in a very, very quick overview, then of course you can do other things. You make scripted events and add text, sound, etc. But in a very quick overview, you basically just import already things that you have created with different software in Unity, and you put it all together. And the really good news is all these assets that we just mentioned, Unity has full tool parity with pretty much anything under the sun that you might have already been familiar with for using professionally. So here are just some icons of popular 3D packages. A lot of Autodesk products, Max and Maya, of course, Blender, ZBrush, Rhino, Modo, etc. And you might be using them for creating 3D models, for animations. Maybe you've even used them for rendering. But the cool thing is that you don't have to change your pipeline. What you have been using before will still work with Unity. And same with textures. Be it Photoshop, any Quixel or Substance product, or any other software that you might be using, the same file formats, JPEGs, PNGs, etc. You can just import in Unity, and then it will work. So this is sort of what we've already used for a lot of internal production as well. So the next example here is a very sort of high-end short film, a story told by our demo team. And it is the next stage. What we want to really show this presentation is that you can be a smaller team or even just a one-person team and create a story, or you can get together with teams of professionals and have a more sort of AAA look to your story.
This is cinematic. This is definitely cinematic.
This is not something that Megan and I can do in our free time.
Right. I wish.
Yes. But anyway, so we're going to show you now the short film, The Heretic, done in Unity. And I'd like to just stress this. This is not a pre-rendered short film. This is something that runs within Unity. And after we show you the film itself, we're going to jump in Unity for the project itself and navigate around and show a few more things of how real-time is achieved. Let's dive in.
Go take a look. Yeah. Okay, here we go. So who exactly is this guy? You're kidding. They're a fairy tale, Boston. Don't be an idiot. I see it. Open it. Wait. Do it.
Right. Hope you enjoyed the Heretic.
It's very, very impressive. But how is it done?
Right. So Unity, as the game engine, has to focus on performance. So when you want to, for example, create lighting, right? Lighting as a concept seems pretty straightforward. Beams come from the sun, and they hit Earth, and it's nice when you're outside. But then they also bounce, So okay, that's probably something we should still be able to simulate. But then they can reflect again and bounce from some other surface, and they lose a little bit of their power all the time, and so forth. But they don't just bounce, they also enter surfaces. Everybody that has maybe done the trick with a flashlight behind their hand can see how light does actually traverse through objects, and it changes the colors. That's called subsurface scattering. It can pick up the color of the blood vessels. For example, my hand, it'll turn red. So that's kind of expensive to calculate. But also, light doesn't just travel in a straight line. It can bend when it enters the atmosphere. So all of this is really complicated. So what we can do basically is make some assumptions about the light and its environment. We can say, okay, let's just say it mostly travels in a straight line. Maybe we can also remove some of that bounciness around it. And then for some of the really, really physical, accurate formulas, we can have approximations that are just easier to calculate and compute.
So let me make sure that I understand. So what you're saying is real-time engine changes the way that light is rendered, and that's what gives it its speed and performance.
That is definitely one of the aspects, and we'll definitely touch upon lighting, but there's so many other moving pieces. So at the end of the day, you do try to simulate reality, and that is technically what all offline rendering is also doing. They just can spend more time on the calculations because they require a higher level of fidelity with what you see in the real world. But that being said, game engines or creation engines like Unity have gotten to the point where they can reach a lot of the commonly used scenarios pretty accurately. And then everything else is really stuff that the regular consumer of the medium is not going to notice unless you point out. And you can say, oh, you can see that this light actually didn't bounce 7 times here. That is something that is more for the discerning eye. So this is a screenshot with different materials, and you can see basically how they look different when light touches them. So we can simulate a range of materials to make this look believable in real time.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm not completely convinced that everyone will understand what they're looking at with this image. So these are not real materials and textures in the actual world, right? These are all computer graphic simulated materials and textures that are inside Unity.
Yes, and they're running real time, which means that you could just move any, change the lighting. But you're right, this is a bit of an abstract concept. So I think maybe the best thing we can do is jump in with the demo, and we can show here. Let's just see if technology will work on our site. Yes, this is me connecting to my work computer in the lonely Brighton office in the UK. And this is the Heretic. This is Heretic running within Unity. So we can go here to our timeline. I can scroll around. Let's just go back to our marker. And you can see that this is the actual project. You can scroll back and forward. So it's not pre-rendered. Like this is something which at any point you can decide to move something, change light, and it just works.
And there's the character walking forward in the space, I think.
Yep. This is
there he is.
Main protagonist. So let's give another example here with lighting. So this is one of the scenes when he enters the big room, and you can see that I can dynamically just change the light. Like we don't have to press a button and wait for something to recompute. And maybe Megan, you go like, oh, I want this to look a little bit more sinister. Okay, well, I can make the light here a little bit redder. Like, oh, this is a dangerous place. Or maybe he's entering a place of quiet and peace.
Oh, a little,
make it a bit bluer.
Yeah, a little blue.
But this allows really for quick iteration, for exploration of ideas, and it really, how should I put this? It unleashes the creativity. It allows you to really just go, what if, and then just explore that.
And I think this interface is actually something that a lot of people would be familiar with. There's a timeline. You can play the timeline. You can stop the timeline and change something about the scene, and then you can play the timeline. No rendering required.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I should have mentioned this in the beginning of the presentation. I have a 2-monitor setup, so every time I look here, I'm actually looking at the presentation, but it seems like I have a dog that keeps walking in and out, and that is not the case. Right, so that's lighting, but let's see how lighting, for example, looks on materials. So we have this shot here. I'm going to move to the scene view, disable these gizmos just so I can pan around. And you can see the suitcase. The suitcase definitely looks more like it's metallic. Then we have the leather of the jacket. I used to wear leather in my metal days when I listened to metal music. That's what leather looks like in my eyes.
I can see it.
Yeah. And then even other things like the skin material or the eyes, and you can see sort of the reflection of the eye, how that gives it a believable look. So another topic to discuss here. We joked before about we fix this in post, and post being really something in the film industry that you would do after the film is shot, and then you can go and change colors and modify your color grading and that kind of stuff. Even though we have a post-processing stack in Unity, we have the ability to add post-processing effects. The post the frame currently being rendered, not post you have to finish your project and then edit it later. So let's take this shot here, for example, and I can just disable post. So over here, this is what the scene looks before we apply post-processing. And then with it, and I can even have granularity. There's ambient occlusion, which basically allows objects like the pipe here to throw additional sense of shadows, give it a physical presence. The exposure level, make it a bit brighter. We can change the color lookup a little bit. So this is being done in real time as the scene is being rendered, basically right before the scene is presented to you or to the final user. We can just go and be like, hey, just a second, we want to modify it a little bit and put it there, again, in real time.
I think what's amazing about this is that you can make changes not only to the scene with what we're calling post-processing effects, but also to your cameras, right? So if you wanted to try a vignette and some sort of or other lens effect on a camera and then have another camera that didn't have that, you could experiment with your look by applying different post-processing settings to your cameras, and that wouldn't affect your whole scene. It would just affect what's being seen by that one camera. And you didn't mention cameras. That's another thing that I think is totally fascinating. So in Unity, we have something called Cinemachine, which in the real world, it's sort of like a multi-camera shoot, where you can have a camera on the left side of the room, a camera on the right side of the room, the middle of the room, except in Unity land, you don't have the limitations of actual physical space. So you can have a camera that's flying after the character, a camera that's sweeping down from the left or from the right, and all of those cameras can blend and cut between each other really very easily.
Yep, you can even position them in dangerous places where you wouldn't want to put a camera person in.
Right.
And another thing will be amiss to not mention here would be visual effects. So we have here, let's just reset it. We have here the antagonist in the Heretic, Morgan. And the really, really cool thing about this character was that the brief of the character that came to the team was that this was a character that is both male and female, both good and evil. You know, a character that can morph between different states. It has this sense of duality to it, and if you just get that as a brief, you know, that is a very abstract concept, and committing the resources to make different things and render them out to iterate on is a massive bottleneck for most production. But here, you know, we have a character that is completely made out of particles. You know, I can morph this character here between the different stages, and it just updates. And at any point, you know, a creative director can come in and say, I want this to be a little bit different. I want this to be a different color, different size, or I want this to have a different, you know, crumble effect, or whatever it is. And this really, really unleashes the ability of the visual effects artist to not only follow the brief that they're given, but also go to town with it. You know, explore, experiment. Say, what if this character could do also this? You know, what if the individual elements that it's made out of are like this or like that? And you could just swap this in real time.
That character is really beautiful. Could you show us the other state of that character again?
Yes, certainly.
And
yes.
It's interesting to see the effects just change based on the slider. And you're not playing anything, it's just happening.
No, we're not even in what we call play mode in Unity, where, you know, like you can actually just go and follow the sequence, timeline can just play and go in there. No, at any point you can just pause, move things, and just get the look that you want.
Very cool.
So there is, of course, a lot more, but this is also a complicated, big project, you know. So what we'd like to do is, with the next session, the second part of this presentation, we will pick a smaller project and do a little bit more on the fly, just kind of build together something, modify a few things, and maybe just demonstrate some of these concepts in a more compact scenario, if that makes sense. And one thing I actually want to mention before we leave the project here is, look at all the scenes that are present. And this is another very powerful thing Megan mentioned a little bit earlier when we talked about Sherman, that different people can be working on different aspects of the project. And that is also the case here. You know, there is a separate scene for the visual effects. There's a separate scene for all the environments, separate scenes for the lighting, which means that if you are working on a larger team, you can all sort of pull the project. Everybody can work on their own little segment of that scene or of the project, and then you can just push the changes and everybody will get those changes. You don't have to wait for the same assets and, you know, fight basically over who has the time and right to modify them at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's amazing. And next week we're going to talk about, I think people might find this pretty intimidating, but next week we're going to talk about how you can start learning. So if you're very intrigued and you want to know how this is all done, we're going to tell you about resources next week.
So I think that sort of wraps up the demo part of the presentation. We'll be more than happy to take any questions here. And for anybody else who might have to rush and sign off, we really look forward to also seeing you in the next installment of this series. All right. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. We'll answer a few questions live now. If we run out of time, then by all means, please send us any other questions and we can take this offline. And of course, we look forward to seeing you next week.
This is the non-recorded version of us too.
Yes, this is not the young us from earlier last week. This is how we look now.
That's right.
I'm going to drop in the chat a link to next week's session as well. If you'd like to join on that, we'll be doing more of a live, live, it will be recorded as this one, but it will be a actual sort of practical use case, I guess. We'll explore a setting, we'll set up a little scene, set cameras, timeline effects, etc. So,
yeah, and if you're trying to learn and you just need to understand the basics about how to do this, like we're really going to dive into how you can learn how to do this. So please join us next week.
Right, so we're getting we have many questions actually, let's see. So the first one here is from Ben about the thoughts on the Sherman hair system versus the visual effects graph using hair and fur with there. So interesting enough, this week is the Unity Hack Week. This is our annual event where everybody sort of picks something and works on. And I believe one of the teams is specifically looking and getting a straight path basically between external tools and importing hair and then being able to use the visual effects graph to simulate it. That being said, the Sherman hair system was done originally for the Sherman project, and as usual with a lot of things at Unity, when something gets created for a particular demo project or film, whatever, then we try to find ways to integrate it. So right now it's just a matter of choice really, but down the road I think it will make sense, Ben, to have a dedicated hair system, and the visual effects graph I think can definitely handle that. Megan, do you want to pick one?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question as everyone's working at home. How do you collaborate on big projects, and like what version control was used on Heretic? I don't actually know. Do you know what version control they used for Heretic?
Yes, it was SVN.
Okay. So right now you can look at Shotgun. What other options?
GitHub is very popular.
Perforce. GitHub,
Perforce,
yeah.
I believe Sherman used Perforce. So it really just pick whatever you like and whatever you're comfortable with. You can always just set ignores for certain files that you don't want to commit. But that being said, next week we'll talk a little bit more also about ways that you can have different roles on a team without really having to wait, excuse me, for the same assets.
Yeah, so if you're in lockdown, you can work remotely on a project. We have a good question here. How do you export these films? So there's a really cool tool in Unity called the Unity Recorder. And basically you export, you can create an animation in a timeline, just kind of very similar to a nonlinear editor. And then you can export it just like you would in a nonlinear editor like Premiere or Final Cut Pro, and you can make a MP4, or you can make a image sequence, very high resolution. I think it goes 4K, 8K, whatever you need.
Yep. And actually, building upon that, Peter has also a question here about the separate scenes workflow. And in general, like, yes, you, if you're familiar with Unity, you can have scenes where you drop all your objects, cameras, etc. But you don't have to have everything in the same scene. For example, you can have a separate scene with all the environment, separate scene with the lighting. And that really allows, the lighting artist to just work on the lighting. You can have, like gray boxed spheres and cubes in your level in the meantime, and you can just kind of update them as you go along. So at the end of the day, one of the scenes will carry probably the main timeline, but you can also have different sub-timelines that are being referenced there. There's a question here if it's better to animate in Unity or the program you originally modeled the asset in. And that really depends on the type of asset and what you're trying to accomplish. We'll talk about this with the demo next week, that you can really interchange animations. So for example, if you have humanoid characters using the same humanoid rig, you don't have to really do anything within Unity. You can just have these animations already created or imported from a different software, and then you can just kind of swap them. That being said, said, if you want to, I don't know, like animate a door opening, car moving, things that are a little bit more on the simpler animation side, then by all means, you can also do it in Unity. I mean, you can also animate the whole character in Unity, but I guess it's just more what you're comfortable with.
But what I think is amazing is like if you have a humanoid character and let's say you had a library of humanoid animations, then you could share those animations across humanoid characters, which would speed up a production workflow quite a lot if that was a possibility.
Mm-hmm. We have a question in the chat as well from Rolando. They mentioned that they've matched May and ZBrush at intermediate level. So starting learning rendering for Unity. We do have links for next week, I believe. But for right now, I guess just Unity Learn is our learning platform. We just announced actually that it's going to be free. Is that correct, Megan?
That's right. Everything on Learn is free. And that includes live sessions, which is super cool. And we have project files, so like tons and tons of learning resources. And please come back if you're intrigued. And a lot of you must be because you're still here with us. Then please join us next week because we're going to talk about how you can learn how to do animation in Unity specifically.
We have another question a little bit further up in the chat about URP versus HDRP and so the support for future developments for different real-time rendering engines. So first of all, just to kind of be precise about this, URP and HDRP are render pipelines within the Unity game engine. For those that might not be familiar, URP stands for the Universal Render Pipeline, and this is sort of what we're moving to have as a replacement of the built-in pipeline once it has full parity. And the idea of that is that it's a more optimized version and it still launches on all supported Unity platforms. So that is the end goal for URP. HDRP is the high-definition render pipeline. That's more a higher-end goal. But for the actual future and the development of it, we do want to move in a direction where there is less of a focus on which pipeline you are using. Some features will just turn on and off. I believe shader graph is moving to be more pipeline agnostic. So just the things that are not available for that pipeline will turn off if you are on a different pipeline. But yeah, the future really is to have a more integrated approach with all the different render pipelines. So as a user, you don't really have to think about it too much. Oh, apparently there's a live session in 7 minutes about the timeline. Evan just posted.
Yeah, so if you haven't noticed, we are sharing some links in the chat. Check it out. There's live sessions on all different kinds of topics that you can learn about pretty much anything that you want.
Okay, we have another question about next week's webinar, if it's interesting for 2D animation. So even though it's going to be 3D, just because those are the assets that we picked, there are a few 2D specific things that I think it's probably best to look at the 2D specific resources. For example, doing 2D rigging, which is lovely, and you can do it directly in Unity. You can just literally import your Photoshop file, for example, with separate layers, and just put bones, and then automatically within Unity weight them. It's a very easy and straightforward process. So that part is something you probably should go for a different learning resource. But there'll be a lot of things about the setting up of cameras, post-processing, lighting, etc., that can be applicable as well if you're interested in 2D animation.
And we have someone asking about, I think, how you work in multiple scenes. How can multiple people be working on something at the same time? So do you want to take a stab at answering that question, Vlad?
Yes, so we touched upon it a little bit, but the whole point here is that your scenes should be separated based on the roles that you have on the team. It is literally as simple as just dragging the scene within the other scene to actually add more scenes into the current project. But that being said, yeah, if you're using any kind of version control software, and you're the environmental artist on the team, for example, you can just work on your environment scene and just keep committing changes. Then anybody else, when they grab the latest, they'll have your changes without everybody having to wait on the main scene. So let's see. We have another question. If you can make a short interactive animation in Unity with HDRP. Oh, yeah. So the question was really about making the build and uploading it on like itch. So if it is a build that is supposed to run on PC, then great. If you want to run it in the browser, then HDRP is definitely not the right render pipeline for this. But if you make it downloadable to just play on your PC or Mac, that should be perfectly fine. Question about 2D rigging packages, where we'll be adding spline-based bones. I don't know. The roadmap is a good resource. Unity is having a lot of departments, so unfortunately we don't really know everything that's happening with our colleagues in 2D. But I will drop the link for the roadmap in the chat as well, and I just kind of encourage you to check for that particular area. And another thing, if you're not active on the forums, I definitely recommend that you join in and to have your voice be heard. Either ask questions about how to get something done, give feedback for a product that maybe just came out and we're still working on, or maybe just share some of the cool things you've been working with.
Yeah, the forums are super active. And a good place to start with questions. You can also email us if your questions didn't get answered in this session at animation@unity3d.com, and we will do our best to answer your questions. We are so happy that you joined us today. So Vlad, just to go back to the question about additive scenes, I just want to
Yes.
I just think we should really hit this point home. Someone could be working on, an animator could be working on animation, a lighter could be working on lighting. They could both be in their separate homes. And at the end of the day, they could, using Collaborate, push their changes up, or even just throughout the day, they could be updating with the most recent version. And just kind of working collaboratively like that, making changes, and it wouldn't require any re-rendering. It's just there's the update.
It will work just like magic. Speaking of magic, this is my favorite thing from the quarantine.
You vanished. Very nice.
I know. So I think we're about to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, John, Blaine, everybody else here that stayed with us to the very end. And we hope to see you next week for part 2.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Join us next week.
Thank you. Stay safe. Bye.